Morning, everybody. It's 11 o'clock, so about time we got this webinar underway. Becki, are you there?
Warren, good morning.
Good morning, Becki. So shortly I'll be handing over to Becki Houlston, who's going to be giving us an insight into resilience and building resilience in these interesting times that we have. But just before we got the webinar underway, I just thought it'd be a good opportunity to give you an update for everybody on the webinar or the participants as to where we are with Evolve. So clearly, welcome all. Hope you're all safe and well. It has certainly been interesting times, I'm sure, for us all, and definitely interesting times for Evolve. We've run our peer groups throughout this 3-4 month period by taking them online weekly. And that support has been incredible to see that, business leaders, business owners giving each other to get themselves to this times. The Evolve to Succeed podcast is going from strength to strength. So if you haven't caught an episode yet, please do. One of the reasons, Becki, that we brought you onto this webinar is you and I had a conversation, didn't we, a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, about resilience and about the whole lockdown period and all of those kind of things. And there is a podcast that features some of the content you'll hear today. So after you've heard the webinar, please do go to the Evolve to Succeed podcast to listen to that. We've been continuing our coaching, or clearly online, not physical, on a one-to-one basis. And Oliver and others continue to put out some great content and articles. I hope you're enjoying those and some sort of thought-provoking pieces. But clearly what we haven't been able to do until now is any of our events. We ran some physical events at the start of the year, the importance of podcasting, a kind of motivational, inspirational talk from Pip Hare. And the Friday before the lockdown, we did have our business leaders lunch with Warren Haskins telling his story, which was incredible to hear his story and some inspiration. But clearly we can't do those physical events in this environment, and maybe not able to do so for some time. So we wanted to bring some insightful content to you and run some events. So this is our first of a series of 3 webinars that we're hosting. So Becki, this is it. You're getting things underway. And so our first of 3 webinars, we're going to do them fortnightly, kicking off today with Becki. And I'm really interested, Becki, to hear what you have to say. You've been invaluable to me, as I've made known very publicly in the past, about my own personal development and growth and development as an individual, and therefore really intrigued to hear what you have to say on this subject of resilience. So I think probably with that, no further ado, people want to hear from you, not me. I'll hand over to you. The way we're going to, just before I do that, host any questions is there is a Q&A section you'll see in your control panel. So if you've got any questions that at the end of the session, at the end of the presentation by Becki that you want to listen to, please do post the questions, and Becki and I will have a chat and a conversation through them. So Becki, this is the moment of truth. I'm going to hand over the remote control to you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Warren, and thank you very much for the intro. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, that's the first part gone well. I've managed to hand over some tech from Warren to me. Doesn't always go swimmingly. Just like everybody, we're getting used to new ways of doing things, which sometimes tests us, but so far so good. And thank you again for making things so easy, as always Evolve do for everybody. So it's lovely to be with you. Thank you all for signing up and coming to join me this morning. I'm sorry again that I can't be in person, another factor out of our control, but obviously in future events you'll be able to see some of the talks in person, which we're all getting used to online, but in person is preferable for us all, I'm sure. So back to my favourite subject of resilience. So what is resilience we'll be covering? But first of all, a little bit about what I've learned. For some of you that know me already, lovely to connect with you again. And for some of you, you'll have never met me before. So you're going to learn a little bit about me and why I'm up here having a chat with you today too. But I've spent essentially the last 12 years, in fact, 12 years professionally, but all my life, fascinated by people's behaviour, and I've also spent a lot of time helping people to change and transform their lives, but more about that in a minute. One of the big things that I have learned from getting access to thousands of people over the years is that very often as humans, we focus on lots of things that don't really matter. We put our energy into lots of things that don't really matter. We focus perhaps on who is doing what and who is doing what on social media, for example, rather than on our well-being and understanding ourselves. You know, most of us adults have got this odd measuring scale where we focus more outwardly than we do internally. We also might focus on success instead of fulfillment. You know, we've been trained to look and prioritize success over actually fulfillment. And I've worked with many, many successful entrepreneurs that have got the bank balance, but have then found themselves to have no fulfillment in life. So the earlier they've worked with me, the more we can steer away from that. But also, we also focus on worrying too much about what people think. But the reality is, emotions are everything. The problem is we've been conditioned to numb the uncomfortable ones. So we don't learn about the uncomfortable emotions. And the foundation of resilience is through those uncomfortable emotions. So emotions are everything, yet in our businesses, in our jobs, in our relationships, even in our relationships with ourselves, most of us are merely dabbling. We're dabbling at the potential of our emotions and harnessing our emotions. And in fact, we've lost connection with our human spirit. And we've created businesses, structures, timeframes, expectations that actually are not conducive to our human spirit. And for many of us in lockdown, some of us will have regained some connection to our human spirit, to our natural biorhythms, to what suits us better, to the way that we can do business and be just as profitable, the way that we can prioritize what's important to us and still fulfill our obligations in our jobs as parents. We've learned a lot. But also, I think the most interesting point of resilience is this, and that the probability of you being born you is 1 in 400 billion. 1 in 400 billion are the odds of you being every single one of you who's sat on this webinar today. And you began life as a single cell, no brain, no consciousness, no fear of failure, no need to be liked. That is the essence of unstoppable life force and unstoppable resilience. You are naturally resilient. It is your nature to survive. It's the way you get in the way of that that creates the issues. And we're going to look a little bit more into that. But this is going to be a bit more of an interactive session. Apologies. This is going to be a bit more of an interactive session. So if you've got an old school pen and paper handy, or some notes possibly that you can take, or, you know, put your phone on silent and just bob it into notes. I really want to give you the most out of this time, to actually not just listening to me giving information, but to actually bring this and the value of this resilience into your own lives. Really, really important. So, you know, without sort of taking time to run around the house or anything, put the washing up down, or if you're multitasking because you've got used to doing that on a webinar, this is not that kind of webinar. I need you to engage and write some notes about yourself if you're up for it. So that's fantastic. So one of the big things about now is 99% of us have actually lost something recently, be it visiting people, finances, sadly some people for business, our peace of mind, our sense of freedom, our loved ones, our identity, some of our status. But we've also lost things that we needed to lose. Perhaps we've lost a bit of weight. Perhaps we've lost the constant distractions that get in our way. Perhaps we've lost some toxic relationships that we put a lot of energy and got a little out of. So we've all had this opportunity to have a giant melting pot, but there's a lot of loss around that. So what I'm going to help you in this webinar do is to identify your effective and ineffective behaviours, to learn about your own responses to challenge, and to then understand how to build better resilience, which is only a good thing. So a little bit about me is I've always been fascinated, as I've said, about people's behaviour. I started off 13, 14 years ago, coaching very accomplished people to be bigger, better, richer, faster. And very quickly, that became a little dull for me. You know, it's easy to work with already motivated people. What I then became fascinated was with people's unhidden potential. And, you know, and actually majorly stress and anxiety, which is the biggest thing that gets in our way of understanding ourselves. And with me personally, you know, second year into my business, I got diagnosed with cancer, which is not in your business plan in your second year of business. And that became very quickly a threat, because I'm in a business model where I sell my time for money. So if I'm not available to sell my time, I'm also earning no money. And that became a big challenge of resilience. And it was one I got the opportunity through a further 6 tumours to get better and better and better at. From the first point of diagnosis, when you're terrified and waking up with panic attacks at 3 a.m, to then 6, 7, 8 years on, actually forgetting that you're waiting for results. But that's because I've also spent 12, 13 years acquiring incredible tools that can change the way you feel, even if you can't change the events that are surrounding you. So that's my passion. And so thank you for joining me today on that passion. So resilience really is your ability to bounce back from adversity. So think about some of the people who face difficult situations. We always share our successes. We always share, or some people need to get better at sharing our successes too. But think of some of the people who face difficult situations and how they've responded in different ways that led to the better than expected outcomes. Stories of resilience often begin with bad news, but we never want to publicise our bad news. We never want to share that. Not really. We might give a showbiz version of it, but we really go and share our bad news because actually we're afraid of that. We're afraid of it looking weak. And that is our #1 mistake. So the story is made, the story of resilience comes from what happens after that. By the dawn that follows the darkest hour. And, you know, history is full of great role models. But just think for a moment, who do you model for your resilience? Because we learn our resilience. We obviously have our natural resilience. That means the fact that we have survived. But also we model resilience. We, you know, from our parents, from our social groups, from people that have had a profound impact around us, is also where we learn how to be resilient. And we're going to look into a little bit more about what resilience is and how to then bring that into your life in a moment. But look at characters such as Nelson Mandela, who was incredibly resilient to withstand that level of isolation, which is mentally destructive and emotionally destructive. And he turned that adversity into a triumph. You know, one of my favorite films, Shawshank Redemption, if you haven't watched it, it's a great one for lockdown. The main character, Andy, is wrongly accused of murdering his wife and ends up in this horrific prison, and he's not guilty. But it's about how he focuses his energy and his resources into escaping a life sentence. It's again a credible story of resilience, of where did he put his energy whilst he was in a situation that was really out of his control. And I can remember myself too, when I was recovering from a significant operation and my first tumour, which had meant that I wasn't able to walk that well for a little while to begin with. And ironically, I'd agreed to look after a friend's dog who'd also had a back operation. And the two of us, day by day, learned to go a little bit further on our walks, both of us hobbling a bit. And one day I got further and further and further, and I took a walk down the chine towards the beach near where I live. And I was really chuffed that I was still comfortable, I wasn't in pain, and I could go a bit further. But I got down to the bottom of the hill. And that's when I turned round and realised I now have to get back up the hill. And I hadn't factored that in as an angle for my foot and my leg. Neither had the dog with his iffy back. So we're both at the bottom of this. I mean, it's not even a hill in real terms, but if you're injured, it suddenly becomes enormous. And I was at the bottom thinking, how on earth am I going to get up that hill? And at that time, he didn't even see me. A guy in a wheelchair came along, not even an electric one, a manual wheelchair, And he sat in his chair at the bottom of the hill, and he just looked up to the top. He paid no attention to me whatsoever. And I observed the determination in him kicking in as he went from a standstill at the bottom of this hill and powered up and took himself up this gradual gradient of the hill. And in that moment, he gave me the energy and the ability and the resources to be able to get up that hill too. And he'll never know the impact that he had on me in that moment. He'll never know that. And that's also about resilience. We can gift resilience to other people. We'll never know in a moment of crisis as leaders, as parents, as teachers, we'll never know the impact that we have had on other people in their times of adversity. So let's take a look a bit deeper about resilience. So now I want you to focus a little bit more on yourself and on your life. And the question I want you to ask yourself is, how resilient do you think you are in your life? And I want you to grade yourself 1 to 10. 10 being I'm really, really resilient, and 0 not at all. So just give yourself a score between 1 to 10, and you know, I'd recommend writing that down. And now look at your job. How resilient do you think you are in your business or your job? And again, grade yourself 1 to 10. So some of the effective behaviours that we need to learn to model to help create resilience is our ability to trust ourselves and others. So right there, that's about, you know, how well do you trust yourself? Again, I want you to grade yourself 1 to 10. 10 being I totally trust myself, 0 not at all. And then do the same for self-belief, for optimism, effective communication, praise and recognition, asking for help, and embracing vulnerability. So just give yourself a score, 1 to 10, on all of those effective behaviours. So to show up in any challenge, or even in, you know, if you're trying to play a bigger game in life, perhaps you're trying to grow a business or start a business, or perhaps you're trying to change careers, the ability to trust ourselves is paramountly important with our ability to access our resources and take us through the foundation of resilience. So how well do you trust yourself? You know, we all experienced our gut instincts telling us something clearly, and we go against it because we're afraid of confrontation, for example, or we're afraid of the change. And so we shrink ourselves instead. And that's, you know, we're going to look at some ineffective ways in just a moment. Our self-belief, you know, do you believe in yourself? And the thing about, you know, emotions are key here. When you start talking about self-belief and trusting yourself, it starts to bring up some uncomfortable feelings in people. And that's generally when they'll avoid that and pick up their phone and start looking at Instagram. But actually, the key to living a happy and fulfilling life sits right there. It isn't about life being challenge-free. If you're waiting for a challenge-free life, then you're going to have a bumpy ride. What we need is to develop the resilience and resources and belief and trust in ourselves to be able to know that we can get through those times. And one of the things that I definitely had challenges with, you know, in the past, I'm much improved, was asking for help. And asking for help isn't when you're on your knees, like I now need help. Asking for help needs to be part of everyday life. It's about communicating what's important to us and finding a supportive team around us. Because resilience isn't just a singular event. You know, when we surround ourselves with a good support team, we can get through anything. But the thing is, we don't ask for help because we're afraid of looking vulnerable. So then we're afraid of being perceived as weak, and then we're worrying about what people will think of us. So we stop ourselves actually moving forward with our most effective behaviours, which are natural to us. A newborn baby has very effective communication. They'll tell you exactly what they need. So what happens? We develop some of these. And these become learnt in the whole. You know, some of those are a bit more nature than nurture, but you know, a lot of this comes from our environment. It comes from what we've experienced and what we try to avoid because we never want to feel that way again. So, anger. Now, anger in the short term is useful. It's a way of putting boundaries down with people. But anger takes 90 seconds to flash through our body, the hormones of anger. So anything longer than 90 seconds is because you're not listening to yourself or you're not addressing what the problem is. I have just as many clients that need to learn to manage their anger better than I do that clients that need to learn to get angry, to get a little bit honest, to stop saying everything's fine, to actually learn to communicate better how someone has hurt them. So denial, pretending it's not happening. I mean, you can just see all over the internet at the moment, there's a big camp of people who are wanting to be in denial and pretending that COVID isn't happening, or that, you know, financially, that everything's fine. Now, for some people it is because they've gone through the adversity and they are listening to themselves and they're listening to the marketplace and they're listening to the environment. But for denial, pretending it's not happening, you know, be it our relationships, when we know they're toxic for us and we're pretending that they're not. In the long term, obviously. In the short term, relationships, of course, have their ups and downs. But that leads us to our greatest blind spot as human beings, is we avoid pain. And pain is our greatest factor for learning until we learn how to learn from joy. You can learn the same lessons in life from joy, or you can learn them from pain. So by avoiding our pain, avoiding feeling it, avoiding identifying with it is our greatest blind spot, but it doesn't feel comfortable. And sometimes we need some help to learn how to get more comfortable with that. Blame. The majority of us blame ourselves more for things that we should not be blaming ourselves for than blaming other people. So that blame really sinks our spirits and it destroys our connection to ourselves and our human spirit. It's the foundation of losing trust in ourselves. And it's when we learn to blame ourselves, it's because of me. It's something wrong with me. It's because I'm not good enough that I can't do that presentation. So, and again, my old enemy is not asking for help. So self-delusion as well. You know, there's been a big movement in the 90s of positive thinking. Now, feeling positive, I'm all for feeling positive, but if you're standing in your garden saying there are no weeds, that is self-delusion. Sometimes you have to look at the numbers. You have to take the blinkers off and get some support to look at the reality of what you're creating in your life. And again, blame and shame lead rapidly to self-doubt. And then when you haven't got that barometer of knowing that you're all right, you're then on wobbly ground. And when we're on wobbly ground, one of the habits that we like to do is to control things. We like to control what's happening in our future. We like to control what other people are doing because it's our way of feeling safe. But one of the biggest costs of becoming too controlling is fun. Right, and at the moment, we have all been in 5 months of having a lot of things taken out of our control. And you're already seeing in the world lots of people trying to find things that they can control because what they're trying to do is feel stable again. But the landscape at the moment is just not stable. And if you're feeling at the moment like you're stood backwards on an escalator in high heels, then it's about developing the resilience to get comfortable with that and not expecting to feel the firm floor beneath your feet for a little while yet. So our expectations can really change what's happening for us. So now let's look a bit more personally at each one of you individually. So we all have a way we naturally respond to challenge. And these fall into 3 key categories, okay? So type 1 person, their way of dealing with challenge is to disconnect from the real problem. Now, I've seen lots of examples in government with that currently, is let's get resourceful, let's come up with lots of solutions, but the solutions don't actually solve the problem. And a lot of people in corporate are very, very well rewarded for their ability to create solutions. But the reality is they're disconnected from the actual problem. So they might throw money at the problem. But the solution, the real problem isn't a financial problem. The real problem is not understanding what the real problem is. So for example, with mental health, they throw lots of money into being able to get antidepressants, etc., but actually not enough funding in dealing and tackling with the real core problem, which is childhood trauma very often. So if they put the resources into healing childhood trauma when people are little, and all the resources and support then, you would get rid of the problem in the future to a bigger or lesser degree. So the first people disconnect from the real problem, and they're the people that will tell you immediately what you need to do. They won't acknowledge the problem. They'll just say, oh, what you need to do is this. That's those people. The second group of people get quite emotional, and they get stressed and more stressed and more stressed, and yet they don't appear to do anything about the problem. They are very, very aware of the problem. They're feeling it. They're waking up in the night with the problem, and depending on their ability to carry pain will depend on how far they go with that journey. But at some point, the pain becomes enough for them to go, right, I'm going to leave this relationship now, or I'm going to hand in my notice. But the damage they've done to themselves on that journey takes some repairing. By the way, in a business situation, if you've got a leader that disconnects from the real problem, and then you are the individual that gets more stressed, the leader that disconnects from the problem is going to avoid you because you are very in the problem. They also might not trust your reaction because you will come across to them as being emotionally not reliable. But in actual fact, when the two learn to work together, they can really combine resources and help each other out. But actually, there's big flaws in option 1 and option 2. The best way to deal with any challenges that come in your life, be it business, relationships, health, or financial, is to look to create many options. It's to become creative. Only when we're stressed and facing challenge, that's the last thing we feel like is being creative. And even if we do create options, what we end up doing is only creating 2. And our biggest limitation is that we only come up with 2 options. Shall I stay or shall I go? Shall I finish that relationship or shall I stay in that relationship? When really, we need to get creative about creating many more options. How can I evolve this relationship? What are my options? So if you're facing any challenge right now and you're not sure what to do, it's probably because you've come up with 2 options and actually neither are right for you. It's a bit like going to a restaurant that you're not that into, and you get the menu and you don't want chicken or fish. So you end up going with a risotto, which you didn't really want either. So instead of saying, well, could you do like the Americans do? Could you do a this with a that on the side with a bit of this? So look at how in your life you could look to create more options, because I bet you if you are at a stuck point anywhere in your life, you are either avoiding the problem or you are certainly not creating enough options. When I work with my clients, I encourage them to create 20 options for their challenges. 20. And these don't have to be really good quality options, then don't even have to be ones that you're actually going to deliver. So look at how you can create more options. So how do you perceive your response to challenge? What is working for you and what is not working for you? Have a think about that now. And as you do that, what I want you to now think about is, what are your top 3 challenges? And these can be personal. They don't just, we are the same person in our personal lives and in our business lives. Yes, we might moderate a bit, but our issues, our fear of confrontation is there at home and it's there in the workplace. Our fear of failure is there at home and it's there in the workplace. So look at what your top 3 current challenges are and get really honest with yourself right now. And what I advise you doing is to come up with 6 options minimum. I'm a fan of 20, as I've said, but I don't want to overwhelm you to begin with. But I would advise you to come up with a minimum of 6 options for each challenge. So let's say your challenge was financial. How am I going to make more money? What I want you to write down is, what are 6 ways I could create more money in my life? And then write numbers 1 to 6 and just populate those empty spaces. But at the same time as doing this, and look, you're going to get a blank spot. You're going to get a point where you're like, well, I'm on number 4 and I just can't see anything past number 4. So that's called a blank spot. And at that point, I want you to just get a little bit excited and rather than frustrated at yourself and push through that blank spot. Because when you push through that blank spot, you're actually getting your brain to go into a new territory. You've reached the end of what you already know, but your brain knows a lot more than you realize. So if you can learn to embrace those blank spots, you can push yourself through. And there's always the best information is always just through the blank spot. Never been wrong yet. So the other issue that gets in our way of building of our natural resilience is understanding what the real threat is. So example, I get sent a lot of people from businesses who are stressed at work. The problem is stress. The problem is never stress. The symptom is stress. And very often, for example, it'll be, so somebody I worked with recently was very highly stressed. And what the real problem was a fear of confrontation. And they were in a boardroom situation, where it was a bit of a bear pit. And, you know, the person that shouted the loudest got heard. And this is just not, you know, back to the human spirit. This is a conditioning that is just not our human spirit. So, you know, the environment was wrong. But he also had issues with fear of confrontation, which went back to his earlier years and his upbringing. So now he's finding himself in a daily confrontational environment and he is mute. But then getting really frustrated and angry because he's not able to express himself. So the real problem there was fear of confrontation. So what I encourage you to do, as your emotions bring up as you face situations that require some resilience, instead of, you know, we do not need the British get on with it. That's made us sick. Because we don't just get on with it, we bury it. And buried emotions show in our health. They wake us up at night, they make us sick. So it's about learning to understand and not be afraid to feel the negative, because you can't release what you won't acknowledge. So what is the real threat? So for me, when I was diagnosed with cancer, the real threat wasn't cancer. The emotional threat to me was a fear of being out of control, because I was facing the unknown on a precedent that I had never experienced before. And what was terrifying me was the feeling out of control. And that made me feel unsafe. So I want you to start to understand and inquire when you face something, what's the real threat? It can be very easy at the moment. We've all got a yellow card which we can play, which says, oh, it's because of COVID. It's because of COVID. It's because of COVID. But the real salvation and freedom forever comes from starting to understand what the real threats are to you. And then name the fear. We've got into a camp where we can say we're stressed, and I fully welcome that. I fully welcome that we're able to say, hey, you know, I am not coping so well at the moment. But stress isn't necessarily the problem. And it stops us. It doesn't matter what you tell someone outwardly, it's more about identifying inwardly with you. So if you are stressed, look beneath that and ask yourself, what is it I'm really afraid of? What is my deepest fear? And again, that's going to make you feel uncomfortable to ask that question. But the freedom comes from acknowledging the fear, because when you name it, it loses its power. But when it's buried, it still stays powerful. We just try not to hear it. So I would highly, highly invite you to name your fears. And, you know, it doesn't matter what you project outwardly, but when you're looking at yourself, you know, is it fear of loss? Is the reason I'm avoiding picking up the phone and getting new business in is because I'm afraid of rejection? You start to find the puzzle pieces that will set you free. So some common barriers that get in our way of our natural resilience, as we've identified today, we all have resilience. It's fear of loss, feeling not good enough, fear of feeling vulnerable, fear of confrontation, fear of not being liked, fear of rejection. Do any of those make you feel a little bit uncomfortable? And that's at the point where most people will reach out for something to make themselves feel better. But these are the barriers we've got to let go of, because they'll keep showing up in the patterns in your life. They make us hang on to things that aren't working anymore, old parts of ourselves, parts of our lives that aren't working. They prevent evolution. And the thing is, life is trying to evolve you, whether you like it or not. One of my favorite books that I read about adversity personally is a book called Breaking Night by, I think, Liz Murray. And it's a true story about, well, it's autobiographical. And Liz never really had a chance in life. She was born to a drug addict father who was in and out of prison, and an equally dependent mother who was in and out of mental institutions. And she seemed destined to just become another tragic statistic and another life wasted. She's an American, lives in New York. And at 15, Liz found herself homeless with nowhere to run. So she immersed herself in the tough streets, riding the subways all night for a warm place to sleep and foraging through trash cans for food. So with no education and no chance at a job or a home or the stability to learn, she realized that only the most astonishing of turnarounds could stop her heading all the way down the same path her parents took. And so she set her mind to overcoming what seemed the impossible odds. And in the process, she achieved something extraordinary. And what she achieved that was extraordinary is that she got into Harvard. As a homeless, uneducated 15-year-old, she got into Harvard. And it's a remarkable story for anyone who is interested in that. So look at those common barriers. Most of my work, I'm working through those to remove those barriers. And the difference with just loosening up one of those can be everything. It'll make you feel completely different. So think about what you have already overcome. Because it's easy to look at what I'm not doing, but actually we can equally learn from what we have done. So what have you already overcome? And obviously there's the odds of being 1 in 400 billion chance of you being here. Pretty immense odds. You've got more chance of winning the lottery, I believe. So look at that life force. And that life force is within you whilst your heart beats. Imagine if you could fully access that life force. What would you truly be capable of? So some of the key resources to building resilience is positive self-talk. It's how we talk to ourselves, and our body is listening to what we say to ourselves. And for most of us, we've got a pretty horrific inner critic that pipes up and, you know, likes to tell us we're not good enough. It likes to tell us negative attributes about ourselves, or where we've failed, or where we don't look good. We've tuned ourselves to get better through tuning only on what's wrong. And that becomes an installed head, a voice within our head that we just sort of follow. And, you know, I had a really bad critical voice. And then I named him. And I named him Nigel. And Nigel was my inner critic. And Nigel stopped me buying the gifts that I wanted to buy for people. Nigel stopped me living the life that I really wanted to live. And he kept me playing a really small game. So by naming your negative self-talk, you can separate it from you. The other thing that I would highly recommend you do when facing negative self-talk, so anything that pops up in your head that makes your spirit sink, don't get into a dialogue with it. Don't argue with it. Just tell it one statement. I approve of myself. So simple. I approve of myself. And if it rows back at you, well, no, you don't. You're an idiot. You just tell it again. I approve of myself. And if on day one you have to repeat that 50 times, day two you'll say it 20 times. It's such a simple solution to a massively painful issue. So if you need to remove those inner critics from yourself, you start telling it, I approve of myself. And when you show up as the real boss, you'll find remarkably that voice backs down. Now, no one really believes that it can be that easy until they try it. So I'm inviting you after this webinar to try it, and you'll see that that voice pipes down. So again, asking for help, build yourself around. We become like the people we surround ourselves with. Build yourself. If you didn't have a supportive family, find supportive friends, supportive partners. Don't tolerate anything less than that, but also be a supportive friend back in return. Self-belief and trust your gut instincts. I've just written a book which is all about feeling safe in the world and what happens when your mind and body don't feel safe in the world. And as part of that, there's a big part on gut instincts. And I interviewed a bunch of special forces guys because I wanted to understand how they thrive in the face of adversity. And they came out with this amazing story. So they were on a mission in the desert in Afghanistan, and it was the dead of night. And all of them felt uncomfortable. Now, these are tough guys who have learned not to show emotion, who have learned to put themselves through some really real extremes. And yet, all of their instincts as a group were saying something's not right. So they called in the RAF, came in with air cover, with thermal imaging cameras. And they scanned the desert ahead, and they reported back that it was clear. So they had the information back from the sky that said there's nothing out in the desert. Yet the information still didn't appease their gut instincts. So, as it happened, the weather made a turn for the worse and the mission was called off. The next day they went back out again, and that's when they found the dugouts. The Taliban had buried themselves in the desert and they'd been about minutes from walking into an ambush, which would have been an almighty fight and possibly a loss of lives. How did their instinct know over the evidence that there was danger out there? So this is about being able to trust your gut instincts and starting to perhaps allow yourself to trust it, listen to it, trust it, and act upon it. And obviously our self-care, if we're not putting in the right nutrients, if we're drinking too much wine because we want to numb our uncomfortable feelings or don't like being on our own, you know, we can't expect the carcass that we were born with, and we only get one carcass. We need to help the human spirit by giving it the mobility and the self-care. Whenever I'm working with a client who's facing a massive challenge, be it divorce, health, financial, a relationship breakdown, or legacy from childhood trauma, I always say when you're facing challenge, double your self-care, up your self-care, because the stronger you can make yourself, the more resources you have to deal with the situation. And of course, goal setting. So goal setting is about being clear about where you want to go in the future. Now, we're not in control of that, but it's important to make that decision about what you really want from the future. But then it's also important to then lose the attachment to it. So, you know, I want to get my book out and get my book published, but I then need to detach from it and make sure I'm writing a really good book today. If I am measuring myself in the future, then I'm going to start my negative self-talk. I'm then going to start to paralyze my ability to even show anyone my book. So whilst goal setting is really important and knowing what it is that you want to achieve, becoming too attached to that achievement starts to create possibly success without fulfillment. So as we come towards the end, and I know that I've dumped a lot of information and a lot of fast-paced information at you, I'd like to just give you a little break from that for a moment. So just before I show you a video that I really enjoy watching myself on those days where I need to dig deep, think about that. If I could give you a way to discover your emotional freedom, what would you do? And I'll be taking some questions and answers at the end of this as well. So pop in your questions. So I'm just, oh, we love a little tech gremlin. There should be a video coming up in a moment, which obviously worked every time we tested it.
It did, didn't it, Becki? It was perfect.
It did, yeah.
In the run
it did.
check.
It worked perfectly every time we tested it. Let me go back and forward again. See, we were doing so well with the tech.
Yeah.
You can always guarantee a gremlin's going to come in somewhere. Right, let's see what we can do this time. So in the meantime, while we just give that a second, and apologies that you're just seeing a buffering screen. In the meantime, is there a question that's come up?
No questions at the moment, Becki. Well, that is buffering. I was just going to say, I mean, from some of the things that we've done together, you know, and you've helped me over the years, I think, you know, naming the fear, that positive self-talk, and the importance of self-care, I think are some of the things that hit home that have really benefited me over the years. But the one above all that I think has made a real difference is creating more options. And I think I was definitely somebody that always saw, you know, even with the kind of mind I have and being relatively creative, maybe saw 3 or 4 options, but it's only when you go into that blank space, as you described it on this presentation, Becki, that you actually find some of the options that really do work.
But yet we fear that blank space. That's the thing. We've become afraid of that blank space because we're so used to being bombarded all the time that we don't know how to manage that blank space.
Yeah.
I caught myself doing it the other day with something that made me feel uncomfortable, and my instinct was to avoid it. You know, avoid it or do it. But actually, there were many more options in between that I could have used. So
it's trying. Making some funny noises, Becki, but it's trying.
Great. I mean, there's another way we can do this. So there's another way we can do this. So, okay, if I can screen share, then I can grab it in another way. So bear with us, everybody. We hope to be able to bring this video to you, which worked beautifully in the practice before.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, while you're sorting out, I mean, I think so. I would say to people that are on the webinar, that exercise about just establishing what the top 3 common challenges you face, you know, the combination, and that combination of them being personal and business. Because I think, you know, I'm a believer in that holistic success, that you've got to be in balance, both personally and business perspective. And right now, you see a lot of people just addressing the business challenges and ignoring the personal. So, you know, do think about those top 3 challenges that you do face, and that exercise that you laid out of then, you know, those combination of personal and business challenges, and then creating 6 options, at least 6 options for each challenge will, I'm sure, enable you to get everybody to get lots of benefit out of this session today. So have you got a different solution, or?
I can, but I need to be able to screen share, which I can't currently. So perhaps if you could allow me to. Oh, perhaps apologies for our little tech. Yeah, I need to Yeah, no, I'm not able to screen share at the moment. And then I can bring it in from somewhere else. What you're witnessing now is live resilience.
Yeah.
There's always another option.
It won't allow me to screen share with you, Becki. I'll tell you what we'll do. It is a great video that everybody should watch. We'll do a follow-up email with a link to the video, Becki. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So thanks for bearing with us while we demonstrate you know, a live resilience moment.
We do have a question, Becki, so can I pose it to you?
Yeah, please. I'd love to hear a question. Any questions, just pop them in. You've got a great opportunity now.
Cool. So from Jack, so with regards to the real threat you mentioned about not being afraid to release negative emotion, once you're able to identify your negative emotion, i.e. fear of not being good enough, how would you then act on this to embrace and overcome it? Really good question.
Okay, yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, obviously I've spent 12 years collecting tools and techniques that help someone to do that fast. But a really good way actually is learning to be present in the emotion, but also to breathe your way through it. What happens is with these barriers are learned from childhood, and it's a reaction that our nervous system is having. So what needs to happen is the issue needs to be processed by the nervous system. So a breathing technique is a really good way and a simple way that everyone can use. So when that powerful emotion that sort of feels like it's cracking your chest open comes through a bit, we don't know how to handle it. So what you can do instead is you can breathe in through your nose through the count of 4. So I'll demonstrate now. It's a simple thing, but we just don't do this. So if you breathe in through the count of 4, so, and then out for the count of 8. So you may increase your breath to 5 and then out for 10, but the more you can allow that emotion to move through your body, it loses the intensity. But the first way is to name it. It'll lose its power. Allow yourself to feel it and then breathe through it. The other thing is to understand, obviously, where the core issue, the first time that was an issue for you, came from. There can be a lot of freedom, that understanding that your fear of doing a presentation came from the time in maths when you put your hand up and Mr. Dole laughed at you. Personal experience. Yeah. So that's Brilliant. That's what I would say, is to get a bit more, to inquire, get deeper inquiry into it, and then breathe through the feeling.
Breathe through the feeling. Thank you, Becki. So I love Becki's views on feminine versus masculine emotions. Could she say more to help us all, including the men, to have more balance and help us better be healthier? That's from PJ.
Thanks, PJ. Hi. Yes, I've been, this is not about being male or female. This is masculine energy versus feminine energy. And historically, we've lived in a very patriarchal society with patriarchal rules. Don't cry like a girl, get on with it. Don't show weakness. And yet vulnerability is the foundation of our connection. And we need connection to create collaboration and support. So we are shifting through from a very masculine energy led time. Masculine energy says more, 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 push, 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 control, 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 dominate, dominate. That's the way to move forward. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just out of date now. It's part of the evolution of humanity and it's part of survival. But now we need to move more into our feminine energy. And our feminine energy says, how can I help you? How can I serve you? Our feminine energy is saying, how can we collaborate to achieve this common goal? Our feminine energy admits our vulnerabilities. it's comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know how to do that. How can you help me? Whereas masculine energy will pretend at all costs that it knows what it's doing until it really can't. So this is about evolving from a masculine energy into a more feminine energy, and that is not determined by your gender or how you dress, to be totally clear. It is a safer, more human way to live. So if you're in a business, to evolve your business from a masculine success to a more feminine kindness model, how can I help? And does that answer your question? Brilliant. It's about a massive subject, that.
Right. Thank you, Becki. Any techniques, tips for enhancing your intuition and gut instinct?
Yes, quiet. It's about making time to sit with yourself. And we just don't do that enough. In fact, most people avidly avoid it. But just sitting quietly with yourself, and also going back to write down, like we do too much processing in our heads. Write down some of the times your intuition has been spot on. The other point is, for a lot of people that experience high anxiety, they're actually very, very intuitive. They just haven't known the difference between tuning into fear or anxiety. Fear or gut instincts. So they don't trust their gut instincts. Also, we tend to only tune onto our instincts when we're in danger. We don't tune into our instincts about what's good for us. What does my body want to eat today? What's right for my body? So create quiet and ask yourself a question. So what would you have me do today? I use a beautiful technique called mirror work, where you look into the mirror at yourself, which is freaky in itself for most people. Soul to soul into your eyes, and you ask yourself, what would you have me do today? And then you'll feel an answer come back. So I invite you to try that. I do it in my interior mirror when I'm stuck in traffic. It kind of changes the space, rather than sitting there going, come on, move. So I invite you to make the space to connect with yourself. And you may not be able to act on your intuition yet, but you can start to listen to it. And the more you listen, the more it will turn its volume up on you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becki. PJ just gave some feedback. Brilliant. Thanks. Such a good explanation. More kindness. Exclamation mark. Yeah. 100%. Be kind to ourselves and be kind to others, yeah. I think is a great motto, isn't it?
Completely.
Brilliant. So that is our questions, Becki. I see you've got your contact details up there if anybody wants to reach out to you.
Yeah. And obviously confidentially.
Yeah, perfect. So from an Evolve perspective, I hope you've enjoyed that. The first Evolve webinar we've run, Becki, as I said just now, really insightful. Some of those habits that you've taught me over the years, come through in that webinar. As I said just now, I think everybody should, just think about that top 3 challenges exercise and take it away and do it. Find that quiet time, that 15, 20 minutes today to just go do that and get some benefit out of attending the webinar. So thank you, Becki. As I say,
could I just add, I'm going to be putting out a video on my LinkedIn, which shows some really quite incredible ways of shifting negative emotions. So it will give people an insight into something that is a really different way of approaching these problems. So that will be going out on LinkedIn later on today. I'm
intrigued. I'll be having a look at that. I'll be intrigued, Becki. So from an Evolve perspective, thank you for your support, everybody. Thank you. It's been great to have so many attendees on our first of our webinars. And so thank you for your support. That's really, really appreciated. We will provide a follow-up email that will have a link to actually Becki I think we've done 40 podcasts now. Becki starred on 2 of them. One dealing with what is stress and your belief that actually, your feelings that stress isn't actually really stress, it's something else. So that's a really insightful podcast. I think it was number 2 or 3, and the more recent ones. We'll provide you with those links. So if you want to hear more from Becki, you'll get those there. We do have an offer to say, look, come and see what a peer group's like. And come complimentary, come and attend a peer group with like-minded individuals, share some of your experiences, learn from others, which is what that peer group environment is all about. So we'll include that. You know, if you're not already, then please do. You know, membership of Involve is free, where you can get, you know, a regular update newsletter on the insights, the content that's going on, early notice of the events, both webinars and physical events when we can do them, and discounts to other things. So please, if you haven't already, please do join Evolve. It'd be really, really appreciated from us. And then from our perspective, the next webinar is Nikki Webb. Again, kind of focusing a bit more on the normal, but she's done a lot of research in creating her new creative agency, Ethically, around what the consumer research is saying about the benefits of becoming more sustainable. You know, I think we all want to become more ecological, more sustainable, but what actually are the benefits? What are the consumers saying, and how may it benefit our businesses? So that is 2 weeks today at 11 o'clock. All the details are on involvemembers.com. Please do go on. Please do sign up. And, you know, once again, thank you everybody for being part of this first of this series of Evolve webinars. And, you know, a virtual round of applause, please, for Becki. You've done a great job this morning. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights. It's really appreciated.
And thank you for everyone who's sort of given up 45 minutes, an hour of their morning as well. You know, that you've given yourself time there, and that's everything.
Yeah. Thank you, Becki. Take care, everybody. Cheers. Bye.
Right.
Becki, can you?
I can hear you, yeah.
Cool. All right.
Is that just us now?
Stopped broadcasting, Warren.
Yeah, that.
Yes, I think it must just be. See this?
Still recording, so.
Yeah, let me sort that out.
Okay, it's only us now.
No, it's not. There's participants.
No, that's only Oliver and Ursula.
Okay, cool. It says there's 4 participants. Oh, is that us?
That's us 3.
Should
and
we
now
stop recording?
Yeah, I've stopped the recording. I've stopped mine.
Okay, Warren.
We can always cut it, Warren. If you stop yours, we can always then.
Cool. I'm just trying to stop mine. It's not.